Welcome to In the Room with Courageous Parents Network, dispelling the myths and embracing the truths of palliative care, concurrent care, and hospice care. My name is Janet Duncan. I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner who now works with Courageous Parents Network to help write up some of the content, meet families and providers, and interact with all of you, which is so much fun. So thank you for being here again. Did want to let you know that the session is being recorded. We do this in order that we can have it be on the CPN website. You can find it on the events page. It's also so that people who may have wanted to come tonight but couldn't will still be able to hear and see and listen to the wisdom that will be shared. We do hope that you'll use the chat for questions. I do have colleagues that are monitoring the chat, and as well, we've built in time at the end for a question answer session. So please do one or the both of those things. I first want to introduce to you our panelists, and I'm excited to do that. First up is Jody Krastek, who is an old friend, a nurse practitioner, and she even has her doctorate. Thankfully, I was grandfathered out of that requirement for nurse practitioners. Jody will sort of be our expert for tonight. She is currently the coordinator of the Pediatric Advanced Complex Care Team for Accent Care, Fairview Home Care and Hospice in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Interestingly, she was born in India and trained as a nurse in Scotland, and has worked as a midwife and a hospice nurse in the UK, in India, and in the US. Next up is Brittany Kelly, who's another friend, a newer nurse practitioner friend. Brittany is working now on the inpatient palliative care team at Mass General Hospital for Children. She provides care to children of all ages and all different stages of their illness. And before she went to the inpatient side, she also worked as a nurse practitioner with the Pediatric Palliative Care Network of Massachusetts. So going into the community and working with families there. Our parent panelists are next. First is Danelle Shu, who is the mother of Levi, who's a pretty handsome guy. I hope you saw pictures of him in the waiting room. He was born with severe brain damage and an uncertain diagnosis. And so for 7 years, Danelle collaborated with his team and also ran an ICU in the home, and also was able to nurture moments of joy throughout that time. She now is a parent advocate and a member of the National Pediatric Palliative Care Task Force and Minnesota's Palliative Care Advisory Council. Any of you who are interested can find out more by visiting her website. It's called mamashu.org. And finally, Pam and Mac Weinstein and their daughter Liana, who you see there with us tonight. You may get to hear her later too. So we said that was fine, and we're happy for Liana to join us. She's 21 months old now, and yet at 6 weeks, she was diagnosed with an epileptic encephalopathy caused by a mutation I had never heard of in this SCN2A gene. I had to look at my notes for that. As Leanna continues to thrive and have ever-changing needs, Pam and Mac have experienced both inpatient palliative care, home palliative care, as well as home hospice care. And they told us that they may not always know what they're doing, but they hope that by sharing their family's journey tonight, it will help others of you who are either experiencing that yourself or are helping others who are going through it. So first up, we're going to show you a CPN video, a mashup as we call it, with using 2 videos from our Courageous Parents Network website, just in case some of you haven't seen what those look like, you will be exposed to them. So I also have technical support, you should know, thankfully.
So before doing this, I had no idea what palliative care was. I was alerted to it from a friend of mine who had gone through a similar journey. And she said, it's not necessarily for a child that is going to be passing away today or tomorrow. Utilize the resources. It's definitely for families like yours who has a child that has an acute disease that is definitely affecting her whole life. And it just kind of helps keep a good quality of life going. We're not necessarily doing end of life care right now. We're just looking at making sure her quality of life is where we want it to be. And I think that that's really what palliative care has done for us. Palliative care has done for us, is just making sure that every day our mission is to make sure her quality of life is good. Whether that's 5 years, 12 years, 20 years, but every day is we're making sure that she can live to her best level, to her best potential.
Brooke is in hospice care, which is something else that I think everyone should know about and talk about. Hospice, making the decision to put Brooke in hospice was huge for me, which every other decision wasn't. I think it was just a reality check, like a huge reality check, because with us in our house, we don't live Tay-Sachs every day. It's not about Tay-Sachs. It's about just us and our family and living and doing what we do and work and school and playing and just try to keep it as normal as possible. And so when it came to making the decision to get hospice involved, it was just a real reality check. Like, okay, this is real. She really is dying. We need help, and we're going to get them involved. So once we got hospice involved, everything became much more streamlined.
That one, obviously, we stopped in the middle, but for more, you can check it out on our website. But now we're going to ask Jody to share some of her expertise, again, in terms of how are these things the same and how are they different?
Thanks, Janet. This is a great privilege to be here with all of you in our sort of virtual gathering. So I chose this picture of the umbrella, and this is just going to be a short talk, and we can have many questions after. But palliative care is really like an umbrella, with the hospice just being one section of it. In the States, it's the only country that defines hospice as a section of palliative care. In most other countries, hospice is a building rather than a way of caring, and palliative care continues from time of diagnosis through end of life and bereavement. So palliative care is really a way to hope for the best and plan for the rest. So we talked about it being started at the diagnosis of a life-threatening condition for children who perhaps have uncertain prognosis or have high symptom burden, have intensive long-term treatment that are really part of maintaining quality of life, or those with progressive conditions, but it can go over quite a long period of time. I think of a little baby who joined our program at 1 on hospice, and he finished his first year and his second year, and then it was kindergarten time. And in 2013, I went to his 18th birthday party. So palliative care can be very involved or not so involved. But when we look at hospice care, really that focus on comfort, plan of care, staying at home, and focus on quality of life. So hospice in the US is really an insurance benefit. It provides care when no further curative care is suggested. But for children now, if they would like to try experimental therapies or continue on the vent or any of that, that is possible through healthcare reform, and we'll talk about that in a minute. However, when you sign up for hospice, it still has that 6 months or less life expectancy. That is, if the condition follows its natural progression. And as I spoke about that child before, clearly his didn't follow the natural progression. But Medicaid and other payers now as well provide this specific benefit that allows for per diem or a daily amount that's given to a hospice to provide all the medications and needs for quality of life. And it's an additional benefit. So it's an overlay rather than a either or. But you do have to be careful. I know we're talking to people across the nation, and the definition of hospice and how it's given, as well as the definition of children, does change depending on the state. So, you know, when people hear of hospice, they often think of adult hospice, where it's you get hospice care or you continue your curative aggressive therapy. But with this healthcare reform and concurrent care, it's really, you don't have to choose one door or the other, but you can choose both. And they found that this really helps improve quality of life. It reduces hospital stays, which most everybody wants. And it, of course, lowers costs, which isn't the most important thing, but in the larger scheme of things, it is something that is good to remember. So what's concurrent care? And it's a good question, because sometimes you might call insurance or even the Medicaid system, and they'll say, oh, no, we don't do concurrent care. But it is part of the federal Affordable Health Care Act. It's a tiny little piece, but it really is pretty impactful for our kids. And so this allows children up to the age of 18 or 21, depending on which state you're in, to be insured by Medicaid to get hospice care while still getting treatment considered curative. For example, they can get hospice care while they're still getting chemotherapy, but remember, they still have to have that 6-month life expectancy if it follows a normal course. And we've certainly had children come on our hospice program and do well, and then we graduate them to palliative care. So when you're considering that or talking to people about it, just remember each state implements concurrent care a little bit differently. Next slide, please. So really both are tailored to meet the needs of the child and family. And it's important to discuss the goals of care. And these goals of care can change from one place to another. We had a little girl join our program just after she was born due to multiple fatal anomalies that she had. And the family just wanted to stay at home, did not want any code, did not want any resuscitation, anything like that. However, she lived and their goals of care changed. She's now 2, and they're really looking at very different goals of care. And of course, goals of care can change the other way too, when our children's bodies get very tired and we're thinking, oh, we just can't put them through anymore. So really finding out what's best for you and what's available in your community. Unfortunately, pediatric palliative care is not available across the US in equal amount. So finding out what's available in your communities, but then collaborating across settings. So even if your area doesn't have, say, a child life person or a social worker that knows very much about pediatrics, often you can use the community resources and collaborate to make a really wonderful team for your child. And that's palliative care team can really help with that. And ultimately, and I hope you're all doing this for yourself, to be gentle with yourself. This is hard work, but really important work, caring for your children in the way that you do. So really, when we look at palliative care and hospice for kids, it needs to be this back and forth. You know, when I talked about that child who came to us when he was 1, he came to us in hospice care in that middle circle. And then by the time he was 5 or even before, he moved to palliative care because that 6-month diagnosis of end of life didn't fit him. And now he's actually an adult, and so he's an adult with complex medical condition. But any time in his life trajectory, he could have needed hospice care. And so that ability to be flexible and meet the family at their point of need and to really work as a team is what palliative care is all about.
Thank you so much, Jody. And now I'm going to ask the families to share a little bit more of their story. So Danielle, I'm going to ask you first. If you would just tell us a bit more about Levi and how things unfolded for you and for him and your family, especially perhaps when you first heard about palliative care or hospice care. Kind of what were you thinking, what were you feeling, and how did that go with Levi's care?
Thanks, Janet. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So Levi is our firstborn. He's our oldest. And so when Levi was born with severe brain damage, the official name is HIE, it was a shock to us. We didn't know how to parent, let alone what to do when your child enters the neonatal ICU. And so the whole journey was just new and unexpected. And Levi was very complex medical from the beginning. And we weren't really sure that he would live. The initial prognosis was hours to days within the NICU. And so as we walked through moment by moment, we got to a place at about 2.5 weeks where all of a sudden it felt like the team said, I think he can go home. And we were like, what? Home? we joke it was like a swear word because it was that thing we really wanted, but we were totally afraid of at the same time. And that was the point when we were in one hospital system and they were transitioning us to another hospital system to go into palliative care. But it was described to us. At first, we were told we were going home on hospice. And then that was double confusing because how do you go home on hospice? And why would you go home on hospice if you had a medically complex child? And then as we met the team, we learned, no, this was a palliative care team. And this was very different. So there were a lot of big emotions very quickly as we moved from care team in the hospital to care team at home. And once we got that understanding of what palliative care was, it right away at 3 weeks, as we transitioned home from the NICU, Levi was just so little. We were so thankful to be able to have this team and this partnership to walk hand in hand with us. Because we were afraid of, well, how do we do this? I mean, we've gone from being in the NICU where there's an entire team of experts who do this every single day to us, like you and me. What? I mean, I'm not even sure how to feed this kid. He was, he had an NG tube. And so we had to learn everything about how to care for him. And we felt really fragile and uncertain and scared, and yet also full of gratitude that we could even do this, that this was even going to be possible.
Thanks so much. It must have, I'm imagining that it felt very much like a roller coaster of, yay, we're going home, and oh no, we're going home.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay. And I know, Jody, that you were involved with Levi, and I don't know at what point, but I know sometimes as providers, we're kind of scrambling, like, how can we, what can we do? How can we help this happen? And sometimes that's convincing the team that it's possible, and sometimes it's maybe convincing the family. So I wonder what you remember about Levi. And
yeah, I was actually involved with Levi from the beginning to the very end, and in a different amounts. It was a great privilege. And I think learned a lot from Levi and from the family. One of our roles, I think, was really important is collaborating, because people in the hospital don't know what it's like at home. And so to be that bridge to say, yeah, we can do this at home. And I'm like, really? Or say, that's not possible at home. There just isn't enough space to have this or that there. But also, I think we were able to provide a bridge, because Danelle and her family used a lot of non-traditional interventions and things that the medical staff were kind of like, but it worked really well for Levi. And so to help be that bridge and collaboration too, as we learned so much from Danelle and her family.
Danielle, would you tell us a little bit more about maybe those therapies that either were well known or well accepted?
Yeah, we did a huge range of them. We did kind of what we commonly is now known as some of the integrative therapies, so massage therapy, even chiropractic. We got into the work of healing touch and even energy work with Levi. We had a naturopathic doctor who was also trained in Chinese medicine and herbal tinctures and homeopathy. We even had a point where we did hyperbaric oxygen therapy, HVOT, as it's known. And that was a particularly interesting and important time for us to have palliative care, because we had specialists who had very strong feelings about whether or not we should do it, mostly not. And then we had our palliative care team who was able to be a liaison and really help us sit down and talk about it in a open way. As I like to say, the palliative care team, their stake in the game, or their sort of focus, is what's best for Levi and what's best for this family, and and how can we help our family express our values and live our values as a family. And because they're not a subspecialist like the GI or the spine surgeon, there's a different relationship to how the questions get discussed and how they get answered. And so that was a very important juncture. We took a risk as a family and decided to do that therapy. It meant traveling across the country. And so then palliative care could help us figure out, well, then how do we do that safely, and what needs to be done? What kind of decisions need to be made to prepare Levi and prepare us, knowing that we would be across the country and not with a familiar care team in terms of if an emergency happened.
Jody, I bet you had your hand in that too.
Yeah, it all takes some coordination. And I think there's a lot of things that I think part of the role of palliative care is to work really hard behind the scenes, and for the family to think, oh, that was easy.
That's what we hope.
Yeah.
Danielle, before we go on, I know you were you'd mentioned when we talked earlier about sort of that mini ICU in your home that I just kind of wonder, how did that feel to do that? How was that for you and your family?
You know, at first it was something we resisted. We just wanted Levi's life to be as sort of natural and as normal as it could be, even with all of the medical needs that we had. And then as he lived, as he survived, in particular his first pneumonia, we realized we needed more support. We needed to have some monitors. We needed to have some additional technology that we just weren't comfortable with in the home. And then the longer he lived, the more aspects of medical technology and pharmaceuticals and things like that we needed. And then we ran, I call it an in-home ICU because that's how it ran. I mean, his health could change like that. I mean, it's a matter of what color the congestion was. It was clear and runny, and now it's green and thick. Oh, that's a problem. So we had to be as nimble as he was quick. And it was 24/7. We had a home that had a revolving front door, care teams coming in at all hours of the day, and all kinds of care teams. And then when Levi was 2.5, we were blessed to have another son. So then we're managing life as a family of 4, plus the care teams. And it was hard and it was difficult, and there was no privacy in the house. But it's also what we needed to do to care for Levi. So it was kind of that both sides of, you welcome it and you struggle with it and you make the best of it. And thankfully we had great people, and especially palliative care, to walk us through all the seasons with Levi, including his end of life. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Danielle. All right, Pam and Mac and Liana. It's your turn. Oh, you just moved on my screen. There you are.
That was
So,
a tough to follow.
well, we're so interested, though, to hear your story as well, because certainly every child and every family has a very specialness and a uniqueness, right, to their journey. So I wonder how it was for you when you first either heard the word palliative care or hospice care. Kind of where were you, and where was Liana, and how did that feel as you sort of met the people presenting this to you?
Well, so Liana was born at a community hospital here in Massachusetts and was about 3 weeks old when we were transferred from our local hospital to Mass General. And almost right away, we had no idea why she was going. It was more the hospital locally couldn't handle, didn't have respiratory capabilities. And so they said, you know what, your kid is really complex. We're going to send you somewhere else. And that was a mind shock for us. She was born normally a little early, but everything sort of seemed normal. And then one day it wasn't. And we went to the NICU at General Hospital, and almost right away they said, your daughter is having seizures. And she's having a lot of seizures. We just couldn't see them unless she was on an EEG. And pretty quickly, none of the medications to stop the seizures worked. And we had to put her into a medically induced coma. And it was about this time where we met Miss Brittany and the rest of the Palliative Care team. I think it was actually one of the NICU nurses who said, you might want to talk to Palliative Care. And it was at that point we were sort of just like blank in the face and shocked. And if a nurse or a doctor said you might want to talk to someone, or we want to bring this person in to talk to you, we sort of said yes, do what you have to do to help us. And I just remember Brittany and her team coming in, and all of a sudden it was just like the waterworks started, and we had to have a couple of really tough conversations as a couple. I'm kind of glad that we get to do this together to talk to you all. Liana was 6 weeks old when we were told that she had epileptic encephalopathy and her genetic mutation, and that she was terminal and probably wasn't gonna make it 6 months. And I actually attribute the Palliative Care team in making us sort of think about some of those decisions and have those conversations. It really strengthened our marriage, actually. And like our ability to be the best advocate we can for our daughter. It sounds silly, but to trust your mom gut, I didn't necessarily understand what a mom gut was, other than that I had one. And I really have to say Palliative Care and hospice, and even our community palliative care now, have really helped me to define what a mom gut is, and to really say, you know what, something is wrong. I need to talk to someone, and how do I fix that? And for me, that's now Palliative Care, that I can reach out to them. But I went a little fast, sorry. We came home on hospice because they said Liana was terminal. And that was just at the start of the COVID pandemic. So while Danelle said they went home and they weren't really sure what to do or how to do anything, I had a lovely hospice nurse who sort of showed up the next day and said, all right, you've got a bunch of medications for your daughter. We'll help you keep track of them. We'll help you keep track of how to give them to her. And, we were on for just a little over 6 months. We had to go back in the hospital at one point, and it really helped being part of COVID. We've all sort of experienced that, of feeling isolated and being by yourself, and having this nurse come in to just be like, oh yes, it's fine. We can handle this. It really helped us. Coming off of hospice was almost scary. it was great. You know, Liana's doing great. She's gonna grow up and she's not as terminal. It's doing better than we thought she would. But, you know, now I have to keep track of all her medications. Now I have to make sure that everything gets refilled, and, you know, medications that have to be specially ordered or compounded, or, you know, it's a little bit more difficult to just try a new medication than it was on hospice. So yeah, and now we have community palliative care, and my motto with them is you just have to ask. You know, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just wanted to quickly add that, like, you know, from the beginning, all of the services was for Liana, and I felt that palliative care was kind of the first kind of service that we got that was really for the family. So, you know, how Pam mentioned that, yeah, like we kind of had to talk about those tough decisions and all that. So it was kind of the first time where, and it's great that like the whole care team is more family focused than just her, which is the difference, I would just say.
And I think a great example of that is back in May, we actually had to go check Leon into the hospital. We weren't really sure what was going on, and her neurologist said, you know what, I just want to bring you in. And I remember Brittany sort of walked into the room and said, what do you need to be the best parent for your daughter? And Max just goes, I need a yoga ball. Liana really likes that up and down motion, and Brittany said, all right, I got this, and, you know, ran off and found us a yoga ball that had to be inflated. But it was just one of those things that we didn't have to worry about it. We knew that we needed this, and we didn't want to drag it for an hour in the but
yeah. Well, I'm glad that they spoke up about your mama gut, but I'm also happy that Matt got his yoga ball. Yeah, that's great. Great. I wonder, too, as you went, did you sort of feel like you had time to transition from sort of hospice to palliative? I know you've had, you know, a couple different ways of going between those services, and how did that feel?
That's a hard question to answer. I think the transition from NICU to hospice was easy, or a little bit easier, because our NICU team was fantastic, and we were able to, I don't know how, but we stayed in the NICU a little bit longer than we probably should have, until we were ready as a family to say, you know what, we are ready to go home. You know, we did walks in the stroller through the hospital. And the transition from hospice to palliative care was actually a little bit more difficult, because our area was not necessarily covered by pediatric palliative care. We just happened to be in this little niche that the two main groups couldn't support us. And now they do. It took, you know, an extra, I think, like 2 months, but they found a team who could still work with us. And now we have a lot of services actually that make a big benefit to Liana's life.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, well, maybe you help push that envelope. Brittany, I wonder, as you're listening to Pam and Mac talk, what else you're remembering from meeting Liana or getting things going, you know, behind the scenes, if you will.
Yes, thank you again for inviting me to be part of this as well. It's really lovely to be able to reflect even and hear Pam and Mac's reflections too, of such a really incredibly challenging time. I would say that there are some other pieces I remember and recall about them. I think that they were incredibly resilient. And I'm not surprised to hear about the tough conversations that they had after some of our tough conversations. Hi, Liana. They were, as Liana's course evolved and changed, so did the questions that they started to ask. So did the conversations that we were having in the room. And I think that were very receptive, as they described. If there was something, if there was a team or information, anything that might offer Liana benefit, they were very receptive to at least hear and learn about it and then digest and process. And I think that that made it really easy for our team to go in and continue to just learn the ways that we could support them. And when it became apparent that we were all really concerned about what life might look like for Liana, specifically how short it may be, I think that they really allowed us to play the role, multiple roles, providing kind of anticipatory guidance about, okay, we're going to make this transition from hospital to home with hospice. And what does hospice look like? What are reasonable expectations for hospice? So that parents, when they are signing on, know and understand what that looks like in their area. Because families that are in very rural areas or very remote areas, hospice may look slightly different for them. So really setting expectations is important so that families understand what to expect. I would say they also really embrace the concept of us being a safe space to ask hard questions. And sometimes that was, you know, what should we expect end of life to look like? Really, really tough things for parents to think, but then to also verbalize, but the importance of not being alone in those thoughts, not worrying alone, not worrying without a provider being able to say, I share that worry, or here's what I'm worried about. Here's why I don't think that might happen, but I do think this might happen. And as Jody said, you know, the behind the scenes quarterback is huge. You want to make sure that if you are having a child who you really don't know what their course and trajectory is going to look like on hospice, is there a PCP that is willing to be flexible, is willing to be nimble, is willing to be responsive, understand the nuance of what we're asking? And we were able to help facilitate finding a PCP that was in the MGH system, so could read Liana's notes and chart, and was just that and continues to be just that. Really, really incredible, really responsive. And I think that continues to be a role for palliative care and hospice care sometimes, is even translating what a parent and family's goals are, and how that translates into the medical care. Because sometimes, you know, Miss Liana needed to pop into the ED here and there. And sometimes that meant that providers with the best of intentions didn't necessarily understand. So wait, they're home on hospice. What am I supposed to do? What am I not supposed to do? Not wanting to do something that isn't goal concordant, that doesn't align with what the family wants. But again, I guess going back, being the safe space for providers too, to really learn and explore so that they can offer the best care for the patient and family. So I would say Pam and Mac were really incredible and continue to be really incredible. And they allow all of us to follow Liana's lead. So I think that's been a really incredible thing to be part of.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, you brought up a memory for me of the times that I was on call in the middle of the night and the family would kind of be debating, I don't want to go to the ER. It always messes up the whole rhythm and it's so stressful, but should I go to the ER? And then, you know, thankfully, because we had a relationship, we could talk about that risk and that benefit, as well as they were usually happy for me to call the ER first and to say, hey, this is who's coming in and this is, you know, what we've talked about and what the goals of the family are. So I think that's can be a huge piece. Danielle, I'm just gonna go back to you for a minute and ask you, I forgot to ask earlier whether or not concurrent care was sort of used or in your vocabulary. I know it's not as much talked about, but I wonder if you knew about it or if Levi was able to benefit from it.
Yes, I first learned about concurrent care through my work as a parent advocate. I work on our Pediatric Palliative Care Coalition as a parent advocate. So being at the table with providers and hearing about it through that, as well as conversations with the palliative care team. And concurrent care was a gift to us, literally, because when Levi needed to transition to hospice, that was a hard decision to make, even though I knew what hospice was. We had known from the very beginning his life would be shorter than any other child we would have. And yet, actually making that decision was really difficult. And concurrent care, because it allowed us to continue the treatments and the therapies that we had going on with him, and add in hospice, it was actually a much easier decision, even though it was still emotionally a very difficult decision to make. And it was hard to say, okay, yep, we're going to do it. One of the big things that in terms of the impact for us with concurrent care is that all the people that were in our life, because of those different services and supports that are considered life sustaining, they could stay in our life. I didn't have to choose between all of all those people and all those teams and individuals, and then say goodbye to them and then say hello to hospice. Concurrent care allowed us to keep the people and the relationships in our life. Add in hospice. We added it in really quietly. We didn't tell anybody about it because we weren't sure and confident about it, but we trusted the palliative care team. And Jody was actually the one who had the conversation with me that said, I think this is the time. And because of the trust and because of the longevity, and I knew she knew me and I knew she knew our family and she knew Levi really well, I really trusted her guidance. And it was very helpful in making that transition. So yeah, concurrent care was a tremendous gift for us. And I wish it for anybody who's in need of hospice care.
I think before concurrent care, it was always, you can have hospice or you can have your night nurses. Which ones do you want to choose? And it's like, oh, well, that's easy.
Night nurses every time.
Night nurses every time.
Right.
Every time.
But with concurrent care, of course, you can have both.
Right. Pam and Mac, how about for you? Was concurrent care brought up or just behind the scenes?
So we actually had no idea what concurrent care was until we started talking about this forum. And it was actually Brittany who brought up last week that for us and for our family and the kinds of needs that Liana has had, yes, there was a medication that Liana was on while on hospice that wasn't covered. And that is our example of concurrent care, but we didn't have to think about it. All of the magic just sort of happened behind the scenes that, yes, your insurance will cover it. It'll still be available to you. And Brittany can probably talk about that more than I can.
All right. Well, just good to know. I'm aware of the time, and just in at least as far as my questions, I wonder, I guess I'll go back to you, Pam and Mac, if there's anything you would want to sort of share with the group that either hasn't come up or that you would like other families to or providers to know.
So I think it's a really good point that you do have to have that level of trust and that relationship with your palliative care team. And it's not something that's built overnight, but it kind of needs to be, if that makes sense. When you have a child with special needs, at least in our world, it had to be built very quickly. But having someone whose job is to be your friend and your advocate and to help you be the best parent is an invaluable resource that I wish everyone had access to. and everyone who has a special needs kid should have access to. Because for us, that safety net, that, you know, I just need someone to talk to when you don't know who to turn to, is invaluable. Do you?
Okay. Mac, do you want a final word there? Okay. How about for you, Danielle? Is there?
Yeah, we had palliative care from what I would consider pretty much the beginning, that 3-week transition, 3 weeks old transition from NICU to home. And because of that, we had those conversations like Pam and Mac talked about, of those hard conversations. What are you going to do in the event of an emergency? What are your values? What do you envision? You know, if you get a couple days, weeks, months, a year, like what do you envision as family? How do you be family? And because we had those conversations and we worked those hard conversations between my husband and I, as well as and with the care team, and we had that as a foundation from the beginning, it changed the trajectory of how our life as a family went. That became the template through which it became the filter. All those foundational decisions became the filter through which we made every decision. Whether we did a big medical procedure, whether we went on a vacation, whether we added, you know, care teams. I mean, every nuanced decision was filtered through those larger values and care plans that we had from the very beginning.
Thank you, all of the panelists, so much. I'm gonna just see if there are any questions that have come in or any comments that my colleagues are reading, because I'm trying not to read at the moment. Carrie or Jennifer.
Sure, Janet, I actually had a question.
Okay.
It sounds like Pam and Danelle and Mac, you cumulatively were receptive to palliative care. And I know in my own experience, I was as well, but I also hear from a lot of families at Courageous Parents Network that sometimes they're hesitant and they have sort of a fear of the terminologies of hospice and palliative care. So how do you as providers help those families, coach them along or bring them into the fold, so to speak? Like, how do you redirect for a family who might not be quite as easily seeing palliative care as an asset?
Jody, do you want to take it first?
I can take it first, sure. I think it really depends on the family. And so just kind of gauging where they are. So, you know, tell me about your child and what are the days like, and are there more good days than bad days? And just kind of a very gradual conversation. So it's not just, okay, I'm here to tell you about palliative care, but rather listening to them and seeing what their needs are. Oh, it sounds like, am I hearing you right that you said he hasn't had a good day for the last 2 months? Yeah, really? Okay, well, you know, and so sometimes that's useful for families of cultures where you don't talk about it. It's helpful to use a narrative thing like, you know, some families do this and some families do that. What do you want to do? Or to tell a story, you know, I had a family very like yours and they made this decision and this is what happened. You think you might be interested in that? So just kind of opening it gently to them, rather than usually in the medical world, we come in and say, all right, here we are, do this, do that. But it's just such a difficult thing to be gentle. And often it takes more than one conversation. Say, okay, you know, why don't you just think about it? Here's my number, you know, just call me if there's anything at all. And then often it takes a while, you know, it's as our families have said, it's a big decision. It's hard to do it. And it very much depends on the family and what they understand of the situation, very individualized.
Brittany, how about for you?
I
I would say as an inpatient provider, similar to as Jody was just sharing, I think I have the benefit of sequential visits usually. And I would say we just keep showing up. And I think that there's a lot of power in bearing witness, even when you can't necessarily change the outcome or the ultimate outcome. I think there are a lot of ways that we can impact and change the journey that a family has or the experience, the care experience. And I think when you keep showing up and you are curious and you help where you can help, and I think in palliative care that can be atypical the way that it looks. Sometimes it's a yoga ball. Sometimes it's encouraging families to bring in weights from home to kind of direct frenetic energy. I think it can take shape in so many different forms, but if you keep showing up and you keep being curious, families recognize that your intentions are good and you're there to support them, and that our role is as advocates for what the family wishes and wants, and we don't have an agenda beyond that. And I think if you keep showing up, you can have that become evident to a family.
Yeah, I'm just reminding it of another thing that I learned was that sometimes when we would have to sort of ask permission, coerce permission, whatever it was, from the attending that the child had on the inpatient side and for palliative care. And when the residents or other folks would say, gee, should I ask the family if they want to see you? And I said, well, probably, if it's okay with you, I would really love to go meet the family and introduce myself, because, I think kind of like you both said, by being in the room, being gentle, introducing myself and or the team, setting up a meeting for a different time when it was good for the family, when they could choose who was there with them, just giving them a little bit of that prep and leeway really made a difference. Because other times I would hear, well, I don't think they want to meet you yet. And I'm like, well, what did you tell them what palliative care was? Or, how did you introduce us? So anyway, that was kind of one of my strategies. So, all right, anything else from the chat, Jennifer or Harry, or, or comments?
Well, I was just curious, hearing from you guys, Pam and Mac and Danelle as well, like transitioning from sort of one service to another. If you felt, especially I think going from being on hospice and coming off of hospice, I think a lot of parents don't realize that that does happen. And with chronic illness, it kind of does happen often sometimes with certain cases. And I was just curious if you felt how you felt about that transition off, and how you described or changed the way you thought about goals during that time.
So I think our biggest goal for Liana, and this really goes back to being in the NICU and talking with Brittany and the Palliative Care team about what our goals were, is our biggest goal is still for Liana to live her best life. And that's what it says in her early intervention notes. Like, that is our goal. We want to do everything that can allow her to be happy. And I think coming off of hospice, we're a little bit more direct with that, about, what makes her happy is music. How can we get more music therapy? She now has 3 different music therapists across different services. That's unheard of. And so she has music therapy at least once a week. Sometimes it's twice or 3 times a week. But it's helped her be able to communicate. It's helped her really to grow. And it's helped us be more direct. And I remember in our genetic disorder Facebook group, somebody had said, oh, my kid is having this issue. Does anybody else experience this? And I said, yeah, I have. We only let Liana do that for, a week before we said that this was unacceptable. And there were other parents who were saying, oh, my kid cried like that for 3 or 4 months. So I think coming off of hospice, it sort of taught us to not grow a backbone, but if there's something wrong and you think that something is not the way you want it to be, if she's having too many bad days, you go talk to someone, you fix it. How do we get that fixed? Sometimes there's a little bit of a roadblock with some of the doctors, and maybe they don't always listen or understand. But Palcare does.
And also to add to that the kind of that switch from hospice to Palcare, it wasn't like there was a switch in the sense that now we have a different mindset, being like, okay, we're now off of hospice, let's be, for lack of a better word, normal. It was more allowed us to kind of still continue the goals, because we knew what we're getting into is just another stage in her life that even if she's not in hospice, we're still kind of almost in the same trajectory, kind of taking it instead of milestones, we call them inch stones. So, well, inch by inch.
It's not a 6-month trajectory. It could be a couple of years, but it's still a similar path. The endpoint is just a little bit fuzzier.
Right. So as far as her care and all that, like, just again to reiterate, Pam, is just really more of the same. And yeah, that was our experience.
Wonderful. All right. We're down to like 2 minutes and counting. I just want to reflect that, I love, Jody, that you had the umbrella of palliative care and then hospice care under, but I'm also imagining that sometimes we can flip that umbrella and see sort of palliative care and hospice care as services that can help hold and give space and just help everyone, as Pam and Mac just said, make each day be as good as it can, allow for Liana or Levi to have the best life that they can. So thank you so much, Jody and Brittany and Danelle and Pam and Mac and Liana. It's been great to have you here. I'll just remind all of you here that we will send out an email within a few days with how you can get to the events page on Courageous Parents Network. If you're not members, we'd love to have you join. It's easy, it's free, and it allows you to access the resources that we have. We actually have a hot off the press new guide on hospice care, palliative care, and concurrent care in nice little columns that you can either share with people who you think it might be helpful to, as well as many other resources. So again, thanks for being here. Thanks especially to the families for sharing your story, sharing your children with us. You all are always our very best teachers. So thank you, and have a good night.